let's talk a bit more about the ongoing negotiations to reach the second phase of the ceasefire and hostage release deal as Prime Minister Netanyahu makes his way to Washington, D.C. With us now, Gidi Grinstein is a former peace negotiator under the former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak. He's also the author of Insight, Peacemaking in the Oslo Process, 30 years and counting. Thank you very much indeed for being with us, Gidi. Good to see you again. Are you hopeful?
Thank you for having me.
Are you hopeful from what you've seen that Israel will be able to get through to the next stage of these negotiations and get, of course, the rest of the hostages home?
Unfortunately, my hope actually lies with the Americans, because I believe that in Israel, the political forces are driving toward effectively resuming the war at the end of phase one and deferring phase two with some hope of changing the situation in Gaza militarily. I think the political leadership in Israel understands the horrible political and diplomatic mistakes that were made in reaching the deal. The deal was the only one that could have been made on January 18. But at the same time, you see a government that gave all the aid to Hamas, released non-Hamas prisoners to Hamas, allowing Hamas to deploy in Gaza. These are, and also those of you that will look at the third phase of the deal, you'll see that Hamas has a standing in the longer-term transition period and even in the permanent status of Gaza. All of this was done because the political line collapsed, and it collapsed on January 18 because there was no alternative. So when one looks at the phase two and phase three of the deal and analyzes phase two and phase three of the deal, we understand a couple of things. Number one, phase one, the first 42 days, we are tomorrow on day 16, will have to be extended. There's absolutely no way to do all the 7 exchanges and to figure out the implementation of phase two by week 5 of phase one, meaning effectively within 3 weeks. So phase one will have to be extended. Then we look at phase two. Toward phase two, Israel will finally face the question, who will govern Gaza at the end following Hamas? Because what we saw is that Hamas, in order to be a threat on Israel, it needed a lot of rockets and it needed tunnel system. But in order to be on Gaza, it only needed to be a man in uniform with AK-47s and to be unopposed. Israel did not bring forward an alternative to the control of Hamas in Gaza. That alternative, since the beginning of the war, has been the Palestinian Authority.
All right, okay. I just want. So we're running out of time because I just want to move on because Netanyahu's on his way. President Trump has just also invited Jordan's King Abdullah to come to the White House as well, and this as he pressures Egypt and Jordan to take in civilians from Gaza. You're saying the discussion needs to be about the day after in Gaza, but Trump has thrown a complete curveball in, saying the Arab countries need to take some responsibility for what's happening in Gaza. He's thrown the ball into their court, as it were. What do you make of this approach?
You know, and some some Egyptian and Jordanian friends asked me what they should respond, and I told them yes, but of course we're happy to negotiate. There are issues. If Palestinians want to leave Gaza and they want to come to Egypt and Jordan, and if the United States is willing to pay for it, and if it is part of the reconstruction of Gaza, and if there are assurances that Israel is not going to annex parts of Gaza, I think it's a great idea. I think it's a bad idea for any country today to say an outright no to President Trump, which has been repeatedly shown since he's been in office, the willingness to deploy very forceful steps. So my advice to Egypt and to Jordan was to be yes, but, and to say yes, but to President Trump and to be part of the solution. That being said, it has almost no effect on the implementation of the January 18 deal between Israel and Hamas. Because if you look at phase two, and especially phase three effectively speaks about transition from the ceasefire to the reconstruction of Gaza, a 3 to 5 year period of the reconstruction of Gaza, right? So the question is, again, who will do it? And I think next week, perhaps finally, there will be a candid conversation between the Americans and the Israelis in which the Israelis will have to say, who will replace Hamas in Gaza? And there's only one answer for that. It's the Palestinian Authority. And we better start helping them prepare now.
I just want to quickly pick up on that. Those who are against the Palestinian Authority taking over in Gaza point to two things. First, the PA does continue to incentivise terrorism. It pays salaries to the families of terrorists. It is also really struggling to impose control under the territories currently under its control, places like Jenin, as we will talk about later in the programme. Is the PA really ready for this kind of responsibility?
Correct. This government is in a total split. It needs the PA to replace Hamas in Gaza on the one hand, and on the other hand, it is fighting the PA and pushing against the PA in the West Bank. Which will win? The approach of Smotrich that seeks the dismantling of the PA. Yesterday, Smotrich spoke about extending Israeli sovereignty in the West Bank, which means canceling the Oslo Accords, which means dismantling the Palestinian Authority, or the approach which is required in order to push Hamas out of Gaza.
Well, I think Prime Minister Netanyahu has called, I think in the last few days, Oslo the mother of all sins. I mean, he sounds like someone who wants to undo the Oslo Accords.
Tough luck. He's right now in a situation where without the Oslo Accords, he cannot manage Gaza. What is the legal system in Gaza? It can only be the extended agreements of the Oslo Accords. Netanyahu is not going to be the legislature of Gaza. He's going to create a constitutional system in Gaza. What is he going to do in Gaza? There is a commitment in the third phase to open Gaza for trade, to open the economic agreements. You know, this position of Netanyahu against the Oslo Accords, sadly, is totally wrong. And by the way, on your screen right now, you're seeing President Trump. President Trump put forward a plan in January 2020, which Netanyahu called the deal of the century, which is based on the Oslo Accord. It upholds that Gaza and the West Bank are a single territorial unit. It offers a territorial exchange between Gaza and the West Bank. It calls for a Palestinian capital.
It was rejected outright by Mahmoud Abbas, of course.
Yes, by the Palestinians, but it was accepted by Netanyahu. And I also want to say something very clear. The Americans have clearly said Saudi is a priority, normalization with Saudi. There is no normalization with Saudi if there is breakdown of the peace of the ceasefire in Gaza, meaning the continuation of the ceasefire in Gaza is essential for the Americans on their agenda of their normalization with Saudi. And in order to do that, there will have to be a Palestinian introduction of a self-governing body. Now, this is also a huge opportunity to reform and upgrade the Palestinian Authority. The UAE said that they're willing to support this. We can put in, this is our historic opportunity, de-radicalize the Palestinian Authority, stop the pay for slave. By the way, the pay for slave, the payment for the prisoners, huge opportunity. The jails are being significantly emptied right now of very serious criminals. About 2,000 to 1,900 may be exchanged within the first phase. I believe an equal number will be exchanged in the second phase, meaning the number of Palestinian prisoners in the Israeli jail is decreasing dramatically, which is also an opportunity to change the policies regarding them on the Palestinian side. I think there is a huge opportunity here. And with some diplomatic vision and diplomatic boldness from the American side, they could transform the Middle East in Gaza, in Saudi Arabia, expanding the Abraham Accords to Indonesia, agreement in Lebanon on the border, perhaps an agreement with Syria. And who knows, maybe even avoiding a war with Iran through diplomacy. This is an extremely plastic moment, and all of us should cross our fingers for the success of President Trump.
Gidi, thank you very much indeed. Gidi Grinstein there.
Thank you very much for having me.